Good morning and welcome to this Thursday and to session 4 of the series that I'm running on conscious living. Today's session is a challenging session and it's called acceptance, and it's about acceptance. And why is it challenging? It's challenging. I've run a number of these courses, and just the feedback I get is that this is the toughest section of the course, the one on acceptance. Why? Because we're constantly running away from things that we don't want to feel, thoughts, emotions, situations, even our bodies that we constantly run away from. So acceptance is an extremely helpful attitude to have if we can embrace it and rather than run away from it. Because all acceptance is, just as a preamble to this talk today, is about perceiving what's going on, acknowledging what's going on in a non-judgmental way, which is very mindfulness based, in a not assigning any positive or negative or good or bad to that situation. And again, if this word acceptance is too sensitive for you to hold tightly, in a sense, then one can use the word acknowledgement. Simply use the word acknowledgement. And just a reminder, hi Bobs, I'm glad you could join us today. I know it's slap bang in the middle of your day there in Scotland. Rain, thanks for joining us. But acceptance is tough, but it's definitely not resignation, and it's definitely not tolerance for situations. For example, if you want to accept that you can't do something, that's giving up. That's not acceptance. So acceptance, and we're going to talk about it through today's session, but it's accepting what's going on sort of in a moment-to-moment basis, like now. So often, for example, if we have pain, if we've got a headache or you have a headache coming on, the first thing we do is we run for a tablet. If you've got an itch, then we have to scratch it. We don't allow that itch to be there and allow it to naturally go away. So we then try and ignore, distract, or even numb it through alcohol or drugs or gambling or porn or anything, these ways that we try and get away from what it is that we're feeling or thinking. And when we do that, in Buddhism they call this the second arrow. The first arrow is actually the painful feeling of sadness or guilt or insecurity. The second arrow is then the one that harms us even further, and that can become an addiction that we're having. So acceptance is the opposite of avoidance, and it is a great way of learning to get away from that second arrow, which creates a lot of blame and criticism and even denial. And when that happens, we become very angry. And I think after this session of 8 talks or so, I'm going to do a whole other series on anger and the handling of anger, because anger is extremely debilitating. All right, so thank you. Welcome to anyone new that's watching today. And again, I keep doing a shout out because I've picked up a lot of followers in India and Nepal, that area. So welcome if you're listening in from that side. Hi Madeleine, thanks for joining us. So let's move into today's session. And like I said, just suspend disbelief. Yesterday's session was on judgment, so suspend disbelief for today's session. Hear what you're about to hear and see how you can apply it in your life. But acceptance is extremely counterintuitive, but give it space to sort of settle into your subconscious, and it's going to become quite helpful to you. All right, in your attempt at conscious living or your move to conscious living. So some of you that have been at my talks before, there's a couple of new slides that slides that I've used before, sorry. So when it comes to emotions, we look at these emotions and we always label these emotions good or bad. So love, anger, joy, fear, shock, happiness, curiosity, sadness, guilt. If you just go through these emotions and have a look at them and sort of label each of those, majority of people will label love good, anger bad, joy good, fear bad, shock bad, happiness good, curiosity good, sadness bad, guilt bad. When I ask the question, why do we label these good or bad? The obvious answer is because of how they make us feel. We don't like to feel sad or guilty or shocked or in fear or angry. We don't like that emotion. It doesn't set up a nice feeling in us. So what do? We try and move away from that emotion. And I'm not going to go too much into it here, but I just want you to see how we label these things as good and bad. And I want you to understand that sadness has as much right to be in the room as happiness. And we'll do a great metaphor about this a bit later on in today's talk. But they're just two sides of the same coin, but yet we label them good or bad, and we seek only one, and we don't want the other one in our lives. So then we've touched on this many times, but I'm using it. I have a lot of different or new people that watch these videos. So I'm just going to quickly refresh your memory around the ABC theory. This is the cognitive behavior, the basic cognitive behavior therapy approach. A plus B equals C. And it's simply put, A stands for activating event, B stands for your belief about that event, and C stands for the consequence. So I'm going to go back to the snake analogy because it works the best. So a snake comes in the room, we believe it's going to bite us or kill us. So the consequence is fear. And when we don't want to feel that fear, and you can replace fear with sadness, any of these other words that we had here, guilt, anger. We don't want to feel that feeling out of control. So what do? We then try and control the activating event, that input variable. And we do become very controlling because we don't want to feel it. And we try and control what we can't control instead of looking at the belief, which is the B. All right, so that's all you need to understand initially, is that we don't want to accept that we're supposed to be scared. But when a snake does come in the room, we are supposed to be scared. We don't have to overreact. So we don't have to always run away or kill the snake. But we can sort of allow that fear to be there, and it'll give us a lot more options if we do that than running away or killing the snake, which are only 2. We can also faint, which is 3. So there's a maximum of 3 options if a snake comes into the room. Whereas if you allow that fear to be there, there could be 10 different options to how do we deal with a snake. So also, just to start today's talk, I'm going to just go through this great poem by Rumi called The Guest House. And I'm just going to read it to you quickly. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He might be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And again, we're going to talk to this during the course of the session, because if we block out sadness, or we block out fear, or we block out anger, we miss the message that emotion is trying to bring with it. Some of you may or may not know Viktor Frankl. He was a survivor of a Nazi concentration camp. He was a Jewish guy. He lost both his parents. The Nazis killed his parents, they killed his wife, and they killed his children. And he was thrown into a concentration camp. He wrote a book called The Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he spoke about, he couldn't understand how some people are able to get through the concentration camps and feel stronger, or come out of that experience stronger, and others were totally broken by their time in the concentration camps. And he coined this phrase, D equals S minus M, or this equation. And it stands for despair is suffering without meaning. And when we don't find meaning in our suffering, when we just think, oh, this is all me, and you start having a pity party, we start having deep despair, which can go into a very, very deep depression. Or despair is even more than depression. It's a long-standing depression. So Viktor Frankl definitely said some people are able to handle adversity better than others, and we need to find meaning in our suffering. So the object of today's talk is to discuss this concept of acceptance, and how mindfulness certainly requires one to be willing to receive or to experience adversity. There's a wonderful metaphor called the willingness metaphor, and we can use an example of fear of needles. Someone might have a fear of needles. Now that person might never ever challenge their fear of needles. But what happens if they get cancer? What happens if they need to have chemotherapy? What happens if they're trying to have IVF or trying to have children? Then you've got to have a needle. And it's amazing how, if you are willing, how we are able to overcome that fear. So if we start accepting what it is that we need, and we increase our willingness quotient, if we call it that, we then are able to overcome something. So the challenge I often ask clients when they see me, my coaching clients or my therapy clients, is how willing are you to make changes in your life? And often we're not willing. Why? Because it's going to set up other emotions that we don't want to feel. So it's extremely important. So acceptance, and I say this is a tough course again, or this a tough part of the course, because it's extremely complex and quite paradoxical. Like I said, because we run away from things rather than accepting them. In the skiing metaphor, we can use, this is not water skiing, this is snow skiing, or we can call it the skiing or skateboarding metaphor. If you've ever skied or skateboarded or snowboarded, in the skiing metaphor, the question is, which way do you lean? If you're on a skateboard and you're about to drop into a half pipe, or if you've got to ski down a slope, do you lean forwards or do you lean backwards? And the obvious answer is we must lean forwards. You have to lean into the problem. If you lean back, your skateboard's going to slip out, or your skis are going to slip out. So you need to lean forward. The same with acceptance. We are leaning into the problem rather than away from the problem. We've touched this beach ball metaphor countless times, and it's good that I say it over and over and over again, because it's a going to have a cumulative effect on you, and it'll stick with you a lot more. And the beach ball metaphor is simply that we try and hold these beach balls underneath the water, and when you hold a beach ball underneath the water, it keeps popping up. And this is what we do with our feelings and our thoughts that we try and repress, the ones we don't want. They're going to keep popping up in our lives. And isn't it a lot better just to let this beach ball go, so that we don't have to waste so much energy holding this ball underneath the water? Because you can't do anything when you're holding a ball down with two hands. So if you let it up, you can go and swim your lengths, you can go about your business without having to worry about holding this ball under. The quicksand metaphor, we've spoken countless times. Quicksand is simply, the more you panic in quicksand, the more it's going to suck you in. If you relax in quicksand, you will sink, but very slowly. And the only way to get out of quicksand is to lie down flat and then roll out. So when it comes to acceptance and applying it to the acceptance metaphor, the more you expose yourself to the feeling that you're running away from, the more you're going to be able to deal with that emotion. Okay. So some theoretical background. We avoid all these negative experiences because, as a guy, certainly as a male, we often taught when we were young, boys don't cry, get over it, walk it off, do whatever. So we tend to start believing that it's very weak to cry. So we can think that we've got to run away from these things. And then we definitely deal with these things by controlling, by using control. And it does make us controlling, whether we want to believe we're controlling or not. And a lot of problems then arise. And some of these problems arise from avoiding, like I mentioned briefly, if say you avoid sadness, we then fail to extract valuable information from that emotion. We definitely reduce that emotion's efficacy, meaning that emotion is there to help you. You've got to elicit that response. You've got to get this energy out that is in your body. And because we then spend a lot of time trying to get away from that emotion, we cannot focus on what we're actually supposed to be doing. All right? So if you're trying to keep sadness out, you can't even try and look for happiness. And this would lead to inflexibility, pathology, which is a fancy word for illness or mental illness, and also that psychopathology. The sadness, let's just say we avoid sadness, the more you avoid it, the more you feed it, in other words, the intensity is going to increase. So every time, I have many people that don't come and see me after the first person has passed away that they know. Normally after the second or third, if they haven't dealt with that initial grief, by the third person, they are now overwhelmed by grief because they haven't dealt with the first one yet. And of course, like we've mentioned, it reduces your energy and focus on the other tasks. By saying no to these unpleasant feelings, we constantly cultivate the perception that they're negative. And they're not. Sadness is not negative. Sadness is just sadness. I keep saying with sadness and happiness, I'm busy putting a book together now about pursuing sadness, because we can never be happy if we're not able to sit with sadness. And so mindfulness is based on this premise that it's not the states themselves that are unpleasant, but it's our relationship to them. And yesterday we did judgment. It's how we've judged them. So it's arguably our fault for judging sadness to be bad and happiness to be good. And if we didn't do that, sadness would be okay. Even now, we're supposed to be frustrated through COVID. Everyone sat waiting on 10 Talks last night for Cyril Ramaphosa to speak to us, and then he gave his speech, and it was like, oh, okay, well, did he say anything exciting? And so we're supposed to feel frustrated, but we can't control what's going on, so we have to just sit back and allow these things to happen. So mindfulness then says, rather than fighting these things, these emotions and thoughts, we should promote more willingness to experience them, our thoughts, feelings, and our body's reactions. This unwanted guest metaphor is a wonderful metaphor, and I've used this. There's many different versions of it. But let's say the way we explain the unwanted guest metaphor is you move into a new neighborhood and you decide you want to have a barbecue or a braai at your house, and you want to invite all your neighbors on the block except the guy next door because he dresses really terribly, is very unkempt and unshaven, swears a lot, and just kind of obnoxious, and he's going to irritate the rest of your guests. So you don't want him, so you invite everyone else. So you have the party. Next minute you see here's this guy. And you say, you can see there's a commotion in the corner of your yard, and what's going on here? And he says, well, I jumped over the wall, you didn't invite me. So you throw him out, and then you make sure you patrol that wall. Next minute he's back in again, and you go, how did you get in? He says, no, I climbed over the back wall. So now you start patrolling the side wall and the back wall. In 5 minutes time he's back in because he climbed over the other wall. So now you go and patrol. So now you keep walking around all 3 of these walls trying to keep this guy out because you don't want him, because he's affecting your guests, he's arguing with them. And then he comes in through the front door. Eventually you realize, I've got to leave this guy because I can't enjoy my party. And so I'll let my friends kick him out or tell him that he's really irritating them. And this is the unwanted guest metaphor. It shows how you can't enjoy your own party. You won't enjoy your own life if you're trying to keep sadness out and insecurity, etc. Some people avoid love their whole lives because they're scared they're going to be hurt. All right. So this unwanted guest metaphor speaks about, rather than keeping the door shut, what would acceptance mean if you let this person in? And if you do invite the negative person in, what's the experience going to be like? Will you be able to have a good time? And the answer is yes. You can have a good time with that person there. So, and to ask yourself, how do you deal with unwanted guests in your life? And we're talking about these thoughts or feelings. And what could you do more effectively to deal with these people? And how would it be like if you just allowed them in and gave them some space and listened to what they had to say? And then what would happen if you embrace an unwanted guest? I sometimes think of sadness as being this person that's been locked away for so long that just wants a hug, just wants to be heard. It's a voice inside of yourself that just wants to be heard. And just like you want to be heard, I think that emotion sometimes, if we personify it, also wants to be heard. So the goal is, rather than keeping the door shut, to allow both positive and negative emotions to be present in your life. And this changes the relationship that we would have with them. So in today's presentation, we're going to talk a bit about resistance, acceptance, and then the misconceptions about acceptance. So with resistance, it happens, we in daily life we get many pleasant things. We get mail from a friend, we get compliments, we get nice conversations, but there are many unpleasant things, traffic jams, arguments, boring tasks, and these we don't want. So we try and block these things out of our lives. Okay, the unpleasant things are welcome in, like the guests that we invite, and then we block out we don't invite these other guests. So we embrace the pleasant things, but we resist all the unpleasant stuff in our life. What we don't realize is that these unpleasant things are inevitable, okay, and they cause feelings of resistance. And of course, they trigger thoughts and actions to get rid of them. So we are, like I said, we're either going to grab our booze, or we're going to grab our wine or our cigarettes. In worst cases, some drugs or substance, and develop substance, painkillers. And this would be that second arrow that I spoke about earlier on. So for example, now this conflict that it creates is, I don't want to have pain, all right, because I think it's wrong to have pain. I think it's wrong to be fearful. I think it's wrong to be sad. This is how we traditionally think, and then it creates this conflict because I keep wanting to be there rather than where I'm at. So we've got to reduce this discrepancy between how I am and the expectation of where I should be. I shouldn't be feeling sad, I must be feeling happy. The world is happy. Facebook creates this wonderful illusion that everyone's living this wonderful life, but it's quite an illusion, quite a mask that people wear. So we want to reduce that conflict, and the way we reduce that conflict is through either pushing down the emotions, distracting ourselves. In psychology, we often do this thing called reframing. We reframe the person's thinking. But these are all temporary. Even positive thinking is temporary, okay? Because you can't block out negative thinking. I put a post on LinkedIn a while ago as to why I no longer recommend positive thinking. Because positive thinking is just the opposite of negative thinking, and it's still thinking. So with acceptance, I'm going to skip this exercise rather. So we've done the polar bear, and it doesn't really work too much here. With the rebound effects, actually no, we can do the polar bear. I'm just going to do it for 10 seconds. We often say don't think of a white bear or don't think of a polar bear for 10 seconds. Okay? But I want you to think, every time you think of the polar bear, tell me how many times you think of it. So don't think of the polar bear for the next 10 seconds. Right. So how many times did you think of the polar bear? Some of you are going to say a lot. Some of you might say 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Some might say none because you were able to block it out for 10 seconds. But it's going to take a lot of energy. And in order to not think of a polar bear, we have to create a polar bear fence. So if you don't want to feel sad, you're going to have a sadness fence. So the sadness is going to be there all the time if you don't want to feel sad. Same with the polar bear. If you don't want to think of polar bears, you've got to create a polar bear filter. It's much better to let that polar bear wander in and out of your life rather than trying to keep it out. It's the same as the unwanted guest metaphor. Rather than patrolling the fence to keep your neighbor out, just to rather let him come and enjoy himself so that you can enjoy yourself. So these rebound effects, so that suppressing your thoughts, distracting yourself and reframing, etc., the more you try and suppress it, the more you're going to have these thoughts. Have you ever tried to tell yourself, I must sleep, I must sleep, I must sleep? You're not going to fall asleep if you're doing that by trying to control your sleep. Many people, whenever they try and follow a diet, they put on weight because they become so obsessed with food or keeping food out of their mouths that they end up eating more. It just works that way. So how do we resolve this conflict? Okay, there's only one way, and that is through acceptance. Okay, and acceptance is the opposite of avoidance, like we've said, and this is the willingness to experience what is present rather than running away from it. And of course, I put this on Facebook the other day with someone. Present moment focus is a lot better. They were moaning about Cyril Ramaphosa on TV last night, and I said, last night his talk wasn't that great, but the other two were good. And this person wanted to judge him based on everything just because of last night's speech, but they weren't looking at just staying in the present moment. So with acceptance, we learn to accept how we are. We know that we would like to be happy, but we don't have to get there. Okay, we just accept where I am now, because right now, and it's something else that psychologists do. A big part of psychology or therapy or counseling is normalizing behavior, allowing someone. I had a gentleman come to see me whose wife, after 50 years of marriage, had died tragically and quite suddenly. And in his community, in his culture, it wasn't very good for men to cry. And I'll never forget, after an whole hour here, and he had been crying a lot, and he said to me, "So is it okay to cry?" And it was such a poignant moment for me, to think that, that this guy and his family and everyone thought he shouldn't be crying after 50 years of marriage, of losing his wife for 50 years, and for him to ask for permission. So what we do in psychology is we often normalize pain and normalize the emotions that you're experiencing. So if we're experiencing pain, fear, sadness, etc. in the present, there's no judgment there, and we accept them for what they are. Okay? And to understand that the longer we avoid them, we're going to extend the period that they stay with us. Whereas if you can just deal with that grief initially and integrate the grief and process it in the correct way, the intensity and the duration will be a lot more shorter lived. Okay? So pleasant situations are obviously less difficult to deal with, and we love these pleasant situations, and we also hold on to them. And this is the case of people that like to go out and party, and then you can't get them to go to bed at night or come home because they just want the party to continue because they're having such a good time and they don't want that good time to end. So for these people as well, as much as people avoid unpleasant situations, there are many people that want pleasant situations to carry on, and they don't know when to go home. And I'm sure many of you will know your partners, family members, friends that you just can't get to go home. So this attempting to hold it also creates conflict. So there's more attachment to that pleasant feeling, and you become more trapped in your thinking. So for example, if you're having a great time and you're on the night out, and you want to come home and your partner's sleeping, or your partner's saying, "Let's go home," you think, "Oh, that's going to be so terrible, it's going to be so boring." But you can't appreciate the moment for what it is, which is a great evening. You've been out for 5 or 6 hours. Now you can go home, and there'll be another time to go out for 5 or 6 hours. That wonderful feeling of having this great party can't go on forever. So that's going to create arguments and create a lot of conflict in your life. So be careful you don't want to hang on even pleasant situations. So with acceptance and mindfulness, we see and accept that nothing lasts forever. Everything, all good things come to an end, as the saying goes. Change makes life dynamic. Change is what makes life exciting. Okay? Otherwise, I think life itself could become quite boring. And we're going to talk, I think on the weekend, I'm going to put together one of those impromptu talks where I won't talk with slides, I'll just talk about change. Once we have all these different emotions, we can experience life in a much better way rather than avoiding all these change. And because pleasant moments pass, we also need to experience them fully and really enjoy them when they're there. Some of the misconceptions around acceptance. So acceptance is not indifference, and I touched on this right in the beginning. It's not liking or agreeing with something, and it's not passive resignation. Definitely not tolerance. But it involves willingness to experience the feelings that go with it and the thoughts that might go with that situation. And then tuning into your own personal feelings, your own subjective private experiences. How am I feeling right now? And letting go of control, letting go of trying to control the other person because they're setting up an emotional cycle within you. And take responsibility for your own feelings. Okay? Don't blame the other person for making you angry. So if you have a situation where there's a wrongful accusation, you start feeling angry and frustrated, and then you express discontent with that accusation. Okay? So if we don't really have so much trains here, but can be delays on trains or buses, etc., or taxis, we develop a whole lot of feelings of anger and frustration. So instead of mouthing off at the conductor because nothing's going to happen about this train, we can file a complaint later on, and we can still express displeasure that the train was late, but there's nothing you can do about the train coming late and getting angry and frustrated about it. So just to end off, this is a very simple 3-minute breathing space meditation. Often people say they're too busy to do any mindful meditations, or 20 minutes or 30 minutes. But this 3-minute breathing space meditation is a wonderful, simple way that you can do it at your desk, you can do it on the run, you can do it at a traffic light, standing at a queue in a shopping center. So in the first minute, all you do is you stop, focus on something in your surroundings, even if it's a traffic light or whatever it might be, just to kind of stop your focus. And then just in that first minute, check in with yourself. How am I feeling? What am I thinking about? And what's going on in my head? All right? In my body, sorry. Can I feel the chair underneath myself? So you're checking in with yourself. That's for the first minute. In the second minute, just breathe. Just check in with your breathing. And you can even make it down to 10 seconds or 20 seconds or 30 seconds. And in the breathing, all you have to do is follow your breathing. And when I say check in with your breathing or use your breathing as an anchor, simply say to yourself, I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out. And do that for 30 seconds or a minute. And then the third part of this is to then do what they call whole body breathing. And on the in-breath, just imagine that your whole body is expanding like a balloon, and on the out-breath, it's deflating, and it's inflating and deflating, inflating and deflating. And then from that perspective, you can also check in with what can I hear, what can I see, and sort of just expand it into your surroundings a bit. So the first thing is stopping, checking in with your body. What am I thinking, feeling, and how's my body doing? Can I feel the chair underneath my bum? And then the second one, the breathing. And then the third part is to do whole body breathing, expand and deflate, and sort of see if you can hear anything of your surroundings. And that's just you should do this 3-minute breathing space meditation at least 3 times a day, at a minimum of 3 times. But put it into the day whenever you can. All right, so I want to thank you for joining me today. If you liked it, leave comments. If you're watching the video, say hi. If you've got anything you'd like to ask, you're welcome to also inbox me on my private message me through my Facebook page. And I'll see if I can assist you. And share the video by all means. And if you haven't recommended me and you do like what you're seeing, please go to my page and make recommendations. I really think word of mouth is a wonderful medium to spread the word. All right, thank you. Have a wonderful day.